Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be analyzing the nonverbal communication again of Jon and Patsy Ramsey in regards to the JonBenet case. More on that in just a second. Let's go ahead and roll the intro first. So cold in here, oh my god. Okay, for those of you that do not know, this is not the first video that I have done on the case. If you would like to have more information on it in general, please go and watch the other videos that I have done. I've linked them in the description of this video. It will help add clarity to the backstory and some of the moving pieces that we're working with. In today's footage, we'll be looking at Jon and Patsy Ramsey as they go through a short interview, answering questions about the case in general. We'll try to see if there are any nonverbal indicators that help add clarity to the case that we haven't been able to see so far. There has been a recent Netflix documentary that has added even more information into the swirling cesspool of confusion surrounding this case. So hopefully this will be able to add some more clarity to that confusion. Regardless, I think that's enough of the backstory to this. Let's go ahead and dive into the footage itself.
Police stayed with you all that day and the following day. You felt that you were under their protection because you didn't know where this killer might have been. But it turns out that they were really scrutinizing the two of you, that you were already suspects. Did you have any idea then that you were suspects?
No, not at all.
It was...
Gonna go ahead and pause there. That's a pretty straightforward question, and the answer to it was fairly prompt. Both of them were synchronized across their individual nonverbal communication. Jon says no, then he reiterates not at all, which that reiteration could be seen as perhaps a level of manipulation, that reinforcement. Possibly. It is, simply put, reiteration for enforcement. If he's guilty, it could be hoping to redirect. If he's not, it's just trying to hammer home his point. Something to push towards the authenticity during that. Is the micro no shake along with that? No, not at all. So that micro no shake is synchronized with what he's saying. If it was a nod in that, no, not at all. That could be seen as desynchronized. And then for those of you that do not know, the smaller the movement that is produced by a person, the more likely it is to be subconscious. If it's larger, it is likely to be consciously controlled. So since it was a fairly micro movement and it was synchronized with what he was saying, I could believe him at that point for him saying that he did not at all believe that he and Patsy, the family in general, were under the suspect list. That being said, to me, that seems suspicious in general, and that universally speaking, the family is almost always the guilty suspect pool. So looking at that is the first thing that any law enforcement will ever do, is look at the immediate family and then friends, and then expanding the ring or the net of people from there on out. So the fact that they didn't at all conceive of that is suspicious to me, but their nonverbal communication seems to back it up. Let's continue.
It was reported also, Mr. Ramsey, that shortly after you found your daughter's body, that you called the pilot of your plane to arrange a flight to Atlanta. Is that true?
I did. We had been asked to leave the house. Within minutes of that happening, the police took the house over. We had nowhere to go. Atlanta was our home. We lived in Atlanta for 25 years. That's where our family was. We wanted to go home.
During the day that...
Gonna go ahead and pause there. To me, that's suspicious, and there's a few reasons. Verbally speaking, yes, that's fair, especially during an investigation. A lot of times the premises will have to be fully vacated for better investigative practices to take place. So yes, it's likely that they were asked to vacate their home. They were very well-to-do. He's a CEO of a successful company. Their house itself is quite large. They had enough finances to, for instance, purchase a motel or hotel room in the area, especially to be available for questioning, things like that. So this idea of, oh, well, let's just fly across the US to a completely separate state, hundreds of miles away, to me seems a little bit more suspicious. Now, non-verbally speaking, along with that, what I notice is his tone and his pitch falter off as he's saying we wanted to go home. It enters into this pleading tone that he has, and then the force behind his words becomes lessened as well. To me, that indicates this level of insecurity or insincerity in what's being said. As a person saying something they might not actually feel as confident in, they might show those indicators by having less force behind their words. So the fact that that's coming out there, and it's a questionable decision in general, to me is just a fairly overt red flag. It's not a concrete black and white answer here, but it's not really helping their case in this specific instance. Let's continue.
During the day that your child was found and in the days following, Mr. Ramsey, there were reports from the police that you didn't seem distraught. You weren't sobbing. You seemed stoic. It was said you two rarely talked to each other. To them, this made it look as if you were guilty.
I've heard that, and I find that unbelievable. Uh, I, I've lost 2 children, and for someone to tell me that I didn't act right, I don't accept that.
There
Pausing here. This response from John makes sense. He was also a military person, so his ability to perhaps control his emotions or not show his emotions or not allow them to control him during times of crisis or trauma, it is likely. So perhaps during this time where people are looking at them and seeing that dad's not at all emoting about what's going on here, maybe it could be in regards to even just that. He's also a CEO. He's used to handling high intensity situations. Perhaps that is another reason as to why he didn't emote very overtly during the time. But then he himself in interviews has stated that he was feeling wrecked, and that was the reason that he did behave in certain ways. So there is this flip-flop, I want it this way, but I also want it this way side of things to his answers, which just makes things more complex again. So with that, we're left still wondering, why did he not emote in that area? And then we're left wishing that the research and the science that backs it up could be more concrete in black and white, so that we could, in fact, listen to a statement like this and then know concrete black and white whether or not he's lying. So we're stuck dealing with this partial information, which works in the benefit of a guilty party. For an innocent party, while invasive, it's very effective at clearing a name. For a guilty party, while invasive, if there are faults, it's very effective in shrugging responsibility. So we're left with questions regardless. Let's keep watching.
There is the impression that from day one, the two of you refused to cooperate with the police.
No, that is a media myth. We met with the police on the 26th. We met
And talked with them.
and talked with them for hours on the 27th when they asked us to.
There's some complications around this. At the beginning, he's saying we did a thing. And while he's saying we did a thing, he's doing some micro movements. No, to me, that pushes towards desynchronization due to the slightness of the movements themselves, less likely to be controlled and desynchronized with the affirmative that he's saying we did a thing. Nod. Then he has a very long verbal pause in there, as you can see that he's trying to figure out how to present this next phrase. And then he's like, we met with them, blah, 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 and continues on through that. And so with those two little red flags, for me, I am suspicious in regards to that answer, and they were not very compliant with the local law enforcement at the time. That was shown through their lawyering up very early on. That was shown through them postponing actual sit-down legal interrogation that has records and has footage and audio to be referred to and analyzed later. They did behave problematically in regards to that interrogation, to which they chalked it up to being, we just thought it was a waste of time for people to look at us when obviously the culprit was elsewhere, which diverted the logical, we need to be examined to be excused from the investigation. So let's be as helpful and as open as possible during that to clear ourselves as early as possible. Now, a reason that they perhaps didn't do that is because the police department in the area was mishandling the case from the very get-go, and it did seem as though they were unwilling to explore every avenue of evidence because they had already hyper-focused specifically on the family. But again, if they had nothing to hide, the criticism and the scrutiny could be easily shrugged off by the sheer evidence that they were not involved. And the way that they were claimed to not be involved was based off of faulty DNA evidence within JonBenet's undergarments at the time that not only didn't match the family, it didn't match anybody in the entirety of the records that the FBI had available to them, letting us know that the DNA evidence was null. You can't use that to either excuse or accuse somebody. So there were complications around that, and with that non-verbally, to me, that counted as a red flag. Let's continue.
Come to the police station. We said, yeah, we want to keep working with you, but can't you come here? We can't go out. Patsy was in bed. Patsy was barely able to move. And all we asked was they come here. They said, well, no, we have paperwork at the police station we might need to get a hold of.
Okay. On the 27th of
I understand both sides of this. One, it is not accepted to do the primary police investigation and interrogation in a person's home. It's done in controlled environments that are less likely to be able to be manipulated and controlled by the parties who are being investigated. So that makes sense as to why the police were like, no, we're not doing that. But to play devil's advocate here, I also understand where the Ramsey family would be coming from. They just went through an intense trauma. They might not want to go to these different places. Regardless, I feel like in light of wanting to quickly be able to excuse themselves, getting and doing anything possible, regardless of effort or struggle, would be the utmost of importance to them so that they could, in fact, get the investigation rolling to everywhere else. So again, they were just being problematic for the sake of their own energy and possible psychological state. It's fascinating. Let's continue.
27th, a very good friend of yours, Mike Bynum, said to you, I think that you should hire lawyers.
Mike knew things that were going on that we didn't know. He knew that the police by that time were withholding JonBenet's body for burial. He also, based on his experience as a prosecutor and as a district attorney, could see that the police were very quickly focusing on us as the killers.
Your lawyers advised you.
This scenario, this instance, I have difficulty with because everything is just reliant on John's word for this, that this lawyer did in fact know things and that he did in fact give these instructions, that it could in fact be this way, and that he had this insider knowledge because of his experience, and that's why the Ramseys lawyered up so quickly. That's distinctly possible, especially in the income bracket that the Ramseys were in. They would likely have friends of similar income brackets and have dealings with various legal difficulties due to those income brackets alone. So there is that possibility, but unfortunately, it's all centered around John saying that that's what that friend said, and then having to trust John that that friend had all of the qualifications and knowledge that he said he had. So we're second-handing trusting somebody else's word based off of somebody else that we're already not certain is telling the truth to begin with. And to me, that makes this whole concept of, oh, well, my good friend lawyer said we should do it, rather unapplicable, because there are too many variables of possible deceit in there that, oh well, okay, I get that, but okay. What we're left looking at is that the Ramseys then were just becoming problematic to the investigation. It can be because of their innocence. It can be because of their guilt. Let's keep watching.
Advised you then not to submit to police questions. Why not? People say, wouldn't you have wanted to tell them everything?
Well, I don't recall that our lawyers told us that at the time. We were perfectly willing and anxious to work with the police to find the killer. We had a higher priority at that point, and that was to bury our daughter.
But it would, in fact.
I think that's a fair point, that they wanted to bury their child. I think that any person who has lost somebody in that way, they should have the right to be able to lay that person to rest for the sake of the people around. Obviously, the person laying to rest does not care. So it's just for the sake of the family or friends, the people who have lost the person. So that does make sense. Again, though, especially in this specific scenario, John's trying to then shift that blame or that reason or responsibility to anybody else that could be seen in the area. It is a low level of manipulation, but it is pointing towards both guilt and innocence. I can understand their reasons for wanting to prioritize laying JonBenet to rest, but I can also understand the frustration of the law enforcement of the time being like, then just answer our questions so we can get this process moved forward. Both make sense. It's very complex. Let's keep watching.
In fact, before months before the Ramseys would sit down with detectives for formal interrogation, there was a mutual distrust between the Boulder Police Department and the Ramsey family. Why didn't you take a lie detector test?
Gonna go ahead and pause here. That's a great question, but that 4 months extended period of time that they still did not go in for an interrogation, again, is not pushing anyone towards their innocence, towards them being guilt-free. Everybody, including the law enforcement, obviously the media at the time, people now, they have the logical reasoning of if you have nothing to hide, then the interrogation, while invasive, while uncomfortable, and while arguably, if guilt-free, unfair, is not only necessitated, it is urgent. You have to do that next to be able to get to the rest of everybody else. Why didn't you do that? If you were genuinely wanting the investigation to proceed, stop hindering it when it comes to you. And there is that complexity that comes in. And frankly, the Ramsey family never had a viable reason as to why they didn't do that. There were always all sorts of excuses that tried to shrug off responsibility that never fully added up as to why they wouldn't just comply throughout the entirety of it. And I, again, have to understand that, yeah, that does make sense on some level because of the mishandling of the trial from the police department at the time. There are complexities. But now we're getting to this question of, why didn't you take a lie detector test? Let's see what happens.
No one
That's another-
asked us
Really?
to take a lie detector test.
Police never asked you to take a lie detector test?
No.
I was asked during my interview with Steve Thomas a hypothetical
the
question. One of the policemen that investigated this murder. He said, if I were to ask you to take a lie detector test, what would you say? I said, I would be offended.
To me, this answer, again, makes me frustrated. Again, it's just them being problematic to the investigation itself. Now, there are obviously problems around lie detector tests in general. They detect agitation, not guilt or not deceit. So there are problems around that. I understand for sure. But this is yet another instance of the Ramsey family being problematic to their own daughter's investigation by refusing certain steps that are very normalized in an investigation. So he said at first, I never was asked to take a lie detector test. And then he immediately went back on what he had said and said, well, actually, one of the policemen did say theoretically that if I were to, would you? And my response to that was, oh, how dare you? Instead of, yeah, no, let's do it. Let's do whatever you need to get myself and my family cleared. Let's do those things to get me out of the suspect pool so you can dedicate your time and energy elsewhere. They threw a fit immediately. It's a frustrating thing to see. It's a frustrating thing to hear. And if innocent, I believe that John would probably look back at this kicking himself, being like, why didn't I? Why didn't I just do it? We have questions. Let's continue.
That's what I would say. I wasn't interested in proving my innocence at that point. That
We were
was
frightened.
a non-issue.
There's a murderer loose.
Mr. Ramsey, would you not?
Now we're starting to see some aggression and defensiveness come in. Not only did they clearly state we weren't interested in proving our innocence, and then Patsy hops in, we were frightened, there was a murderer, but the nonverbal communication that's going along with that is aggression, the drawing together and lowering of the eyebrows. We're also seeing disgust and contempt come into the corners of her mouth as she's saying there was a murderer on the loose, and those aggressive tells push me to focus in on this instance of, your reasons of we were frightened and there's a murderer don't give you any reason to not cooperate. That's not a reason to be problematic. And then the nonverbal response that you're giving in regards to that is one of aggression rather than openness. Again, pushing us to feel like this is defensive rather than somebody who's openly wanting to cooperate to clear their name so that they can move on with the case. It's messy, to be sure, and this is not helping their case, in my opinion. Let's continue watching.
Would you not take a lie detector
I
test?
would, certainly.
Would you, Mrs. Ramsey?
Yes, I would take a lie detector test.
So I would. There was a hesitation with the beginning of the I would. Certainly. So hearing those verbal difficulties, the drawing out of the would to me lets me know that there's some strings attached to that I would, and then that reiteration of certainly in there is to try to hammer home the uncertainty of the would before. So it should have been yes, I would. Let's get it done. Very clear, very simple, very confident, very open. Go ahead and do what you need to do. He has strings attached to what would have to happen for him to take a lie detector test. He has some uncertainty in that, and then he tries to rehammer it home with that certainly. Then we go over to Patsy's side of things. She also verbally answers in an affirmative. Non-verbally speaking, there's a lot of no shaking in that. To us watching, that's either a desynchronization point or that's the you wouldn't believe, which both of those leave me asking, what's the problem with that? Why would you have a difficulty around this? Now, perhaps it's because of the limitations of the polygraph test. That could be the case. It doesn't seem as though they know a vast amount about the polygraph test. So then that's pushing us towards the other option of they don't want to do that because there's some other reason behind it. It's a fascinating little cluster that we're seeing there. Let's keep watching.
When you realized that you two were the prime suspects, what did you think? What did you feel? What did you say?
But we were outraged. We were shocked. How could they think that?
Mr. Ramsey, the police officer.
Okay. A little bit of a nose shaking there while he's saying we were outraged, we were shocked. How can they think that? I get that. I get where that sort of sentiment would come from. But then again, on the flip side of that, the less emotional side of that, the logical side of that, understanding that, again, that's where the culprit most likely is in the immediate family, especially in cases like this specifically. And so I have difficulty with that, but I can understand where they're coming from. Let's see what the next questions are.
Police officer that day, Linda Arndt, said on this very program that when you put your daughter's body down, you looked straight into her eyes.
His face was just inches from mine.
And Linda Arndt said she felt then from your expression that the killer was in the house and she was afraid of you.
I'm gonna go ahead and pause here. That can't be done non-verbally. That's only maybe a gut feeling or an intuition, but from what we understand non-verbally speaking, there would not be that ability for the detective to have looked at John and known at that moment for sure, based off of his expression, that he was in fact guilty. So this is a level of assuming and presuming a scenario from that detective. I feel like that sort of concrete statement is a misrepresentation of what nonverbal communication and body language can actually tell a person. So no, for me, I don't buy that detective's statement in general, but it's not because of that detective's statement that I am questioning the entirety of the case. It's due to everything else that's been unearthing. But I'm curious to see how John responds to this.
Well, the question I would ask Linda Arndt, has she ever looked before in the eyes of a father who has just been told his 6-year-old daughter is dead, lying there on the floor in front of him? I don't know what I'd look like. I'm sure I was in agony. I'm sure I went into shock. Linda Arndt's ability to look in someone's eyes and determine they were a killer is a remarkable talent.
You just can't
Gonna go ahead and pause there. That's a valid point. You don't know how he looked during the time of perhaps losing his daughter, so no, you cannot refer to one singular lookup like that as oh, I knew at that point. To me, that feels like malpractice. That feels like a misstep in an investigation. I agree with him on that front. And yeah, that would be, honestly, that wouldn't even be a wonderful thing or a marvelous thing. That would be an absolutely magical thing that she could do that. If she could do something like that, she needs to write books, and a lot of books describing how she knows exactly. She didn't, she can't, it doesn't exist. So I agree with John on this front. That whole little pop of stuff means absolutely nothing. Let's continue.
Talent.
You just can't believe it. I mean, we're suffering from having lost our child, and then for someone to accuse you, it's just you can't believe that that would happen.
Why did they accuse you?
I think the police looked at this situation, didn't apply a lot of logic to it, and said, child murdered in the home, The book says the parents always did it. And that became the conclusion. The tragedy of the police investigation was that it ended on December 26th.
And that's the end of that specific interview there, and I disagree with what John stated there. He tried to dress up what was done in a way that was more strawmanned, with like, oh, they looked at the instance and the book said, the proverbial book, whatever book he's referring to, said that the parents always did it and that's why. That's simply not the case. That is definitely an avenue of it, and I do agree with John that there was a level of malpractice within the law enforcement investigation at the time, but there was a slew of other evidence that pushed towards that as well. It wasn't for a lack of logic, it was due to logic that people were examining them. It was due to patterns in other cases similar to this that people were looking at them, because universally speaking, in many, many other cases, the immediate family and somebody there within is oftentimes responsible. So logically speaking, look there first. So his whole thing about trying to be like, oh, they were illogical and they were going by the proverbial book, this is just building a straw man that's easier to knock down. And so again, that's a level of manipulation by John. This case is unendingly complex. There is still more evidence that has not been discussed in even the videos that I've done here or the documentaries available to the public. There's evidence that oftentimes the public will never actually have access to because, frankly, it's not our business to know. And so the law enforcement, the investigative teams at the time will have that access, but we won't. So the different opinions that exist is either one, it was an external intruder. There are some evidences that push towards that. We haven't been able to find anybody. There has been no landed answer as to who that could be. And the DNA evidence that was pushing towards that, as I said, is not useful until we apply different DNA technology and understanding to it. So that's neither here nor there. Another theory is that John or John and Patsy did something to JonBenet, and that's the culprit there. And I honestly, I see and I understand and I feel why that could be. There are a slew of things that are pushing towards that as well. And then the final one is that perhaps it wasn't just an act of malice by John or by John and Patsy. It could have been something in regards to the brother Burke, where he had behavioral issues and problems, and he had been known to lash out in violent ways in regards to those behavioral issues. And so perhaps he had done something in just a passionate emotional response to something as a child, and then the parents had to try to mask that and cover that up because they had just lost one child. And if they had lost one child to the hands of another child, or even did severe damage to that one child at the hands of another child, so they had to finish the job that had been started, more or less, that would be an ultimately tragic story, but also the one that seems to fit many, if not all, of the facts. If you would like to have more context for this, go and watch the other videos, do whatever other deep dives that you want to, but that's my opinion based off of the footage that I've been able to see so far. I'm still leaning a bit towards Burke having had some form of hand in this just due to his behavioral issues, and then the parents being involved to try to protect their family or what was left of it. But that's just my opinion, and I'm working with partial evidence. So if you have a different one or you have more evidence that helps add some more clarity, let me know in the comments of this video. If you do like these styles of videos where I apply some of the nonverbal communication expertise that I have to various cases or scenarios, let me know other ones that you would like to be able to see, and subscribe to the channel to see more. But without further ado, that's all that I've got for the day. My name is Logan, and you have been oh so awesome, as you always are, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.